Civil rights is dead. There is no longer a need for traditional civil rights. Let me define my terms. When I say civil rights, I'm talking about the right to be treated equally, to be free from discrimination in various settings that include education, employment, housing, voting, and other areas. Now, traditionally, civil rights is a term that has been used to link the civil rights movement and the quest for racial equality for African Americans. The term has expanded to include all races, national origin, age, and religions. Now, I'm a law professor and a civil rights attorney who specializes in voting rights. Imagine my surprise when I am told that civil rights is dead. Now, when people tell me that civil rights is dead, they point to two issues, and the first is they point me to the LGBT community and say that the new civil rights frontier is gay rights, that the country no longer has an appetite for racial issues, that we're now solely concerned with lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender issues. The second issue they point to is the election of Barack Obama. And they tell me that this election of the first person of color to the presidency of the United States makes us post-racial. And we've elected 44 presidents. We've elected one person of color as the president of the United States. Now, I'm a lawyer, not a math person, but one does not equal 44. But when people point to gay rights and President Obama, they are saying to me that we have overcome. Then, in Ferguson, Missouri, an unarmed teenager named Michael Brown was shot and killed by a white police officer. His death and the subsequent decision by a grand jury not to prosecute the police officer sparked riots and protests across the country. Then, in New York, an unarmed African American named Eric Garner was stopped by police officers for allegedly selling single, untaxed cigarettes. He was placed in a chokehold by a white police officer, and despite his cries of, "I can't breathe, I can't breathe," he was choked to death. Then, in Texas, we had a federal district court decide that the voter ID requirement for the state of Texas disenfranchised more than 600,000 African Americans and Latinos. Despite this ruling, the United States Supreme Court allowed the measure to continue. These events remind us that the struggle continues. Whether it's in Missouri, New York, or Texas, these issues are linked to greater civil rights and human rights issues across the globe. It's a struggle that we must endure. It's a struggle for us to ensure that all humans are seen as valuable, that all humans are equal. Now, the election of Barack Obama meant many things to many people. To some, it meant an end unto itself, and to others, it was a brand new beginning. But what happens when these two ideals collide? What happens when we have overcome collides with we are overcome? Are we using the right tools to measure our movement? Is it the election of the first African American president, or should it be the fifth? Is it an increase in the rate of graduations, high school graduations for brown and beige children? Or is it the decrease in incarceration rates or decrease in mortality rates? Is it how do we measure the movement? How do we know when we have in fact indeed overcome? How do we know when we no longer need to fight for civil rights? Well, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. gives us an answer. In 1957, at the first March on Washington, in his Give Us the Ballot speech, he was responding to persons who were saying that because of the historic Brown versus Board of Education decision, that civil rights was done, that there was no longer a need to fight for civil rights. And he tells us that civil rights is not a temporary measure, that it is indeed eternal. It's an eternal moral issue, is what he says, and that we can change our nation if we would dedicate ourselves to civil rights. Now, the great anthem from the civil rights movement of We Shall Overcome, one thing that we need to understand is that overcoming is a constant endeavor, that it in fact is not a destination, but a journey. And in this journey of overcoming, I think we can look to the traditional civil rights movement and learn some lessons. The first lesson I think we need to learn is that we need to have a plan. It is an urban myth that Rosa Parks started the Montgomery bus boycott because her feet hurt. It was in fact a larger strategy, organization. There were persons who decided which bus she would get on, who the bus driver would be, where she would sit, where others would sit, what would happen after she was arrested, how would they organize around this ideal of changing the system in the city of Montgomery, Alabama. There was a plan. I think noted theologian Bishop T.D. Jakes has said, nothing just happens. There's something that happened before this event in order to make it happen. So you have to have a plan. Next, you must have patience. The Montgomery bus boycott lasted a year. It was a year of persons finding alternative modes of transportation. My father-in-law was a student at Alabama State University, which is a historically black college in Montgomery, Alabama, during the Montgomery bus boycott. And he speaks of having to forego Sunday meals at his cousin's house because he could not ride the bus. And he did not have an alternative mode of transportation. So it was having the patience to understand that while you may be temporarily inconvenienced, that it is for a greater good. South African leader and President Nelson Mandela characterized it this way: it is a long walk to freedom. And you have to engage in this walk day by day. The next thing we can learn from the civil rights movement is persistence. One of my students recently said to me that he thinks this generation is looking for a moment and not a movement. Now, if you're looking for a moment, then you can go to a protest, drink a latte, leave, drink a latte, and go home and think that you've done something. But you have to be persistent, right? That's what we learned from the civil rights movement. It took decades of protest, right? It wasn't necessarily the first person. Rosa Parks was not the first person who sat on the bus and was arrested, right? There were several spots along the way, several moments, and all those moments linked up in order to have the change that we now enjoy. Another lesson we can learn is participation. And I think we need to redefine what we mean by participation. Because during the civil rights movement, individuals made a number of very big choices every day. The choice to be nonviolent in the face of violence. a choice to show love instead of hate, a choice to walk in dignity and integrity when people were telling you that you were inferior. And we also must make daily choices on how we want to make this world a better place. And so in participating, we have to redefine it. If you think about the area of voting, participation must go beyond actually casting a ballot. If we limit it to merely going to the polls on election day, we do the civil rights movement a disservice. It certainly must include a before, during, and after. Right? Before the election day, making sure that you're registered, others are registered, learning about the issues, going to rallies, funding candidates, considering whether or not you'll run as a candidate. Right, and certainly on the election day, taking people to vote, volunteering to be an election judge. After the election, calling your congresspersons, your city council, your mayor, being an active participant in your own soul salvation. If we put all of these together, what we get is power. Power to change our situation. We get the power to embrace a brand new world. And if we make these kinds of choices every day, whatever your issue is, if it's a zero tolerance policy at elementary and middle schools, or criminal justice reform, having a plan, being patient and persistent, and certainly participating can lead to power. And during the civil rights movement, we can see the fruits of the planning, of the patience, of the persistence, and of all the individual choices that were made each and every day, and that continue to be made. And that we have landmark legislation. We're now celebrating 50 years of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which gives us equality in employment as well as gender equality, or speaks to gender equality as well as equality in employment. This year we'll celebrate 50th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act, which destroyed barriers like the literacy test as well as other barriers. And it was in fact the Voting Rights Act which helped to elect the first African American president. Now, while we celebrate the first, let's work to ensure that it won't be the last. If I could paraphrase Dr. King, I would certainly say that civil rights and human rights issues are not ephemeral. They're not short-term goals. It is indeed an eternal, moral issue that we must address, and we must make the decision every day to fight for civil and human rights. I have an 8-year-old son. His name is William. He was born into a world where Barack Obama is not the first African American president. He is the only president. And I can only imagine how my son's world has changed because of that fact. So we must have a plan, be persistent, be patient, so that we can indeed overcome. So we can have the privilege of not just overcoming someday, but every day. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. Thank you.